I feel like after 3 years, we deserve a new countdown timer. So I'm gonna have to I'm gonna have to find an alternative countdown timer. But that notwithstanding, thank you for joining us here on the State of Leadership, Simple and Beyond. That is Robert Hilliard. I am Whitney Wiley, and we are here on Thursdays, 3 p.m. Eastern, 12 Pacific, talking all things leadership. And today we are continuing our discussion about change. And if you were with us last week, you know, we started this discussion about how to make change an easier process. We're continuing that discussion and we welcome you to join us. So last week we covered change as a constant, the psychological roots of resistance and things that you can do, recognizing when you're encountering resistance, grief as a part of this process, and then some strategies for moving through that resistance so that you can get to a place where ultimately you can accept the change. And that's what we're going to dig into today. um, is uh, is once you get through the grief process, right? You've got denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and then acceptance. And we discussed that it's while it's laid out linearly, you may not experience it linearly. And there may be some back and forth between various stages, but the hope is that eventually you get to acceptance. And so we're going to talk about acceptance today and how you can use that for real change, right? And the other thing we talked about is there's the change that goes from one state to the other, and then there's the transition, right? You're moving through that identity from what you were before the change in time to from one state to the other, the identity, right? And there's a transition that helps you get from one stage to the other. So, Robert, any opening thoughts as we tackle acceptance today?
Just that, and I had to clean my glasses. So I was making a change while you were talking about change.
Don't you just love that we are so on brand with that?
Exactly. It's like we're changing. Well, I think the thing to remember when it comes to acceptance, it's probably the hardest part of it. It is getting to that. We think that, especially when we talked last week, we talked about the marathon effect. When we are further along in the change or transition journey than other people, we expect them to accept or to come and join us. It can take a very long time for somebody to get to acceptance. They have to go through those stages. And just like you said, they can be ping-ponging back and forth between one of the other stages before they can even get to acceptance. So acceptance can be really difficult.
It can. And so let's talk about how we embrace that, right? And how we move through those stages and finally stop the ping ponging, or the ping ponging has stopped, right? Which is the case for some, and how you can actually just step in to that acceptance and move into the new stage that you're in and continue growing, adapting until what happens? The next change comes along. Because that was the place that we started. It's always constant, it's always happening. And until you're no longer here, that's the way it's going to work out. So,
Right.
what is so when you're working with your clients, what are some of the things that you work on in terms of helping them with acceptance?
validating their emotions, really just letting them know that because there's a tension there, and you cannot make progress until that tension is resolved. And one of the things that is very helpful is to let people know that what they're feeling is normal, is normalizing those emotions. Help if they and asking them, listen, we're working here to get you someplace, but you're having a hard time really coming to grasp with it. Do you want, what do you want to do right now? Do you want to just continue to talk about this so that you can clear this emotion and then move on? Or are you ready to start crafting solutions or actions for yourself? So really giving them the choice as to what they want to do. Do they want to continue to talk about it? And of course, we're holding that space for them without judgment so that they can feel accepted, right? So you want to help them feel accepted so they can get to acceptance. I think that's really important.
As you're stating that, it makes me think about how actually empowered we are in the process. I think a lot of times people will feel like, particularly when change is thrust upon us, right, that we don't have any power. And while we may not have any power in the act or the decision that moves from one state to the other, we actually have a lot of power, and particularly in acceptance. And that power is in the choice, right, that you just spoke about, that the choice to accept that this is what is. And I have been trained in a number of different things along with my coaching. I am a Jack Canfield certified success principles trainer. And one of the success principles, the very first one, is taking 100% responsibility for your life. And what that means is we don't control the events, right? But we do control our response to those events. And there's something very empowering in that, so that we're not feeling like a victim, but get to be an active participant. And last week I shared, an example from a prior work history where the employees of the organization I was working for we were providing feedback. There was resistance, great resistance, and feedback to some of the decisions that leadership was making. And ultimately, we were told, just accept what's going on. And when one by one employees started accepting and then looking for how they could be in that choice, and what the new state was, what the new structure of that organization was, how we were going to interact with people in their new positions. I think there started to be, I guess I would call it, people feeling like they were actually empowered in the process. We did have opportunity to weigh in. They could have, and I'm not saying that everything they did was the leadership did was the best way to go about it, but they could have implemented the change and not had focus groups, not given people an opportunity to weigh in, which I would counsel against. But they could have not done that, right? And so by having that opportunity and weighing in, when the decision was made to move forward, whatever that moving forward looked like, part of it was we had a voice, we voiced our concerns, and if this is the direction that we're going to go, what can I do specifically, right? Individually, what can I do to help effectuate this change so that it will work, so that it can work. And there's a lot of power in that. And so taking the time to sort of think through what it is you want, and this is how I help my clients a lot, is right, thinking through, and we talk about this on the program a lot, thinking through what is it that you want and how do you want to feel, because you're in control of that. And so it becomes about reframing what's happening. And one of the things that you can focus on that's helpful is, instead of focusing on what you're losing, which is a lot of what that resistance is about, right? And not knowing the unknown, that uncertainty in that, but reframing the change from what am I losing to what am I gaining, right? And as we went through that experience, one of the things that I lost was something that I actually wanted, right? So while I didn't think the path that we went down was going to be one that was going to be successful, and it wasn't, there were problems, I actually gained something in that process that I really wanted. And when I took a step back to think about that, I was like, you know what? Yeah, this isn't going to work, but this is what I gained. And what I gained was really important to me. And I think when individuals stop to think about that, they came to much the same conclusion. There were a couple of people who probably really ended up in a microcosm, bad situations that were not better than what they had before.
Right.
The organization wasn't, but for most people on an individual basis in the unit or the departments that they worked in, actually turned out better, for situations better for them. The bigger picture was not, but more on a local level it was. And so if you can do that and stop and think about, what are you gaining? What are the positives in this? It helps to make the acceptance easier, and it helps to cement you in the change moving forward.
I think the key thing something that came into my head when you were talking was that you can move forward when you can finally let that resistance go. When you stop trying to hold on to the past, that's when you're able to say, okay, I can now shift to what am I gaining. And it's easier to do that with certain changes than others. We've all experienced death. It's harder to do it with that, because especially when it's someone you really care about. But there are other changes and other opportunities where we can, that you absolutely have no control over, and wishing and hoping for the old way to come back is not going to bring it back. So once you can get, then I'm thinking corporate right now. Once you can get to the point where you're saying, okay, this is the new normal. This is what is happening now, regardless of whether I want it to happen or not, then you can start to shift your thinking. And some people can't do that. And it may take them a long time. Some people never get there. And we know that. We've seen people that are, 3 years after the change has gone through, they're still talking about the good old days. Why can't we go back to that thing that we were doing 3 years ago? That thing that we were doing 3 years ago doesn't exist anymore. Right. So once you get there, you can do it, but it's how you get there. Easier to do when you have a coach or a therapist or a boss or somebody who can help you think more critically about that. Harder to do when it's yourself. When it's just you, it can be really hard.
Absolutely. I would say that it was I don't know if it was a coach. Well, it was a coach, but not a coach that I directly work with. It was more reading something that a coach and some others had written, some of the books that I've read that has helped me with this process and this getting to a point where and this is how I'd like to think that, and I'm pretty sure it is true that, but how I like to think that I help my clients with this, whether they are entrepreneurs or, the lawyers or C-suite or wherever they are in their careers and whatever it is they're doing, is that this concept of it is what it is, right? And having that mindset helps as changes come and go, being able to let go of the resistance, right? Because it is what it is, right? Right in this moment, things are as they are. And resisting the moment is futile, right? You can effectuate change for the future, but you can't change the past, and you cannot change what is in this moment, right? Everything from this moment back it is what it is. And so when you sort of come to a place in your mindset that that's the way it is, then that's how you can adapt and plan for the future, right? And not just the acceptance, but making any other changes that need to be made so that you can embrace what is and move on fully. Otherwise, right, a lot of the suffering that we have, and suffering, not necessarily physical suffering, but the suffering that we have internally is because we are fighting against what is. And when we can let that go, and that may be able to be done with a coach, hopefully it can. It may take a therapist and looking at some things that you wouldn't necessarily look at to address with a coach, with a therapist, but getting to that place where you are not fighting against what is. And so when I start work with clients and they talk about, well, it should be this and it should be that, and I am, it's like, one, question that, right? Question, should it, right? You think it should be this way. Someone else thinks it should be some other way, right? And on a planet of 8 billion people, there are probably 8 billion and one different ways people could think something should be. And so you can wrestle with that, or you can say, well, it is what it is. I don't want this, or I don't like this. And so what can I do? And that becomes a different question, right? And a different process. But what can I do to change things again, or continue the change so that it's something else? And again, that puts you in a position of power rather than a position of sort of victimhood because something's happening that you don't want. It is, I don't like it, and I want something different. What can I do? Then you can start asking the questions. What can I do? How can I help? Et cetera, in order to effectuate change for the future.
It's as simple as being able to, once you get over that hump, once you can accept, you can then start planning, right?
Yes.
You start planning. And this is a completely off kilter example, but it applies. Years ago, I was playing basketball and I went up for a rebound. Somebody shoved me out of the way. I came down on my ankle and broke my foot, right? Broke my foot. Finished the game because I was like, there's nothing wrong with my foot. Denial, right? Denial. Walked home, denial again. Woke up the next morning and my foot was like huge, right? So it was definitely broken. And it took me about a good 5 minutes to be like, my foot is broken. Like that was the acceptance because I couldn't stand on it. And finally I was like, okay, what can I do? Like, what do I have to do now? And that's a small example, but it's the same basic process.
Yes.
It's something that happened to me. It's not as bad, as people like, yeah, you're really hollow. I'm like, it's okay. I'm gonna walk this off.
Yeah.
But that's how a lot of people approach, changes that happen to them. They're like, I'm just gonna ignore. I'm just gonna ignore and continue to do. And we see that in organizations all the time, especially when we talk about William Bridges in the neutral zone. You'll see some people there when they're in that zone, they're still trying to do the old process, the old thing, or that was happening before. They'll try to subvert the change, or they'll try to do the old thing on the down low, and it usually doesn't end well for them, because they get found out. It causes trouble. So then they go back to anger. They go back to that. So really being able to accept what is really right in front of you is key. And like I said, it can be hard to do. But the other thing is, you can learn to do it through practice. You don't have to, this is going to sound really weird, but you don't have to be the same person all the time when it comes to change. You can evolve, and you can grow, and you can change. Some people just resist that, right? And we know people like that. They're just in a box, and they're not flexible. And we hear, especially older people, you hear them say, well, this is just how I am. It's just, they're immutable. They're not going to change. They don't want to. And so the beauty about being free-thinking humans is that we can change if we choose to do so. We can learn to be better at accepting change.
It's interesting that you bring that up, because two things come to mind when I think about people who sort of, in certain situations, will dig into that concept of this is who I am. And then there are two situations, and there are probably lots of others, but two definitely come to mind about how flexible we can be about who we are and how we show up when we want to, right? One is, and I'm going to start with the non-business related one first, is in relationships, particularly romantic relationships, right? You meet someone that you like. We can make all kinds of changes.
Very flexible.
Personalities. Right? And how we show up, and being nicer and accommodating and all of those things. And so it's very situational, right? Yeah. Very situational. And then the other is when it is in work, and you look at how you act and behave with people at work as opposed to how you behave and act with people in your personal life, not necessarily romantic, but just sort of outside of work. And we tend to be nicer and more accommodating at work. There are reasons and incentives for that behavior, right? In both of those. And it tends to be around getting something that we want, whether it's love and acceptance, respect, etc. So even those people who are saying that this is just the way I am, I would challenge you to look at those situations where you're not like that, and what's underlying that. What is it that you're trying to get that motivates you, right? That inspires you to make those changes? Because if you can look at how you can be successful in some areas of your life, you can take that, right? You can take that success in other areas and bring it to new areas of your life where you need to do a similar thing.
Provided that they know they're doing it, because some people.
Well, that goes back to self-awareness, right? Which you can incorporate in your answer.
Right. Well, but you see all the time. You and I'm really trying not to use personal examples here, but we see it all the time with people that they tell you they're one way, and then they meet somebody, whether it's a celebrity or somebody that they are trying to woo romantically, and I use the old timey woo on purpose, or or trying to get, or a boss or manager they're trying to impress, and all of a sudden they're a completely different person. They're nicer, they're more social when they told you I'm not social. We see it all the time, and sometimes we call people out on that stuff. But there are those other instances where people will be like, well, this is who I am, and they make these declarations. And I want to I don't think that anybody is always one way.
True.
Right? We may see people one way. And that's why it's shocking when we see somebody who we don't like maybe on the job, and then we see them in person with their family, and they're sweet and they're kind, and we're like, how is that possible? They have children. We thought they would eat their children. Well, because they care about their children. They're not the same way all the time. And so, but some of those things that we see on the job may come out in their family, because we do have that. Some of those things may be subconscious, but people can be different ways. And so we do have the ability to, even if we are rather, what's the word I'm trying to use, strict with ourselves or formal. I'm one of those people, I'm a very strict, until you get to know me, and then you're like, this guy doesn't stop joking. But most of the time when you first meet me, you've had that experience with me. I'm very straightforward, especially because I'm an introvert. A lot of people don't know that about me. So when I'm in public, I am very quiet, and I usually try to see, kind of figure out the lay of the land. And then I'm like, I think when we first met, we were in a group, and I was like, okay, these people are all cool. I can be my true self. They're not going to judge me for being the, wacky, judgy, jokey person that I am. So, but when you first meet me, I'm usually very quiet, very stiff, very formal. That's not all of me. That's just a part of me.
Absolutely. That's such a good point. We should talk. And I'm not a personality expert by any means, but we should probably do an episode around personalities, work styles, communication styles, things like that. Right. And your point is well taken, that it is the incentive or the motivation is around people that we love, care about, and getting what we want, right? So saying that you're one particular way isn't helpful, and accepting, right, in a different sort of way, but still accepting that you have the ability to choose how you show up, how you behave around other people, is an important part of your being able to ultimately accept change and adapt to what is, and getting to that place where you don't live in the shoulda, woulda, couldas, and in particularly, it should be this, it should be a particular way, or it could be a particular way, when in fact it is what it is. And own that, accept that, and then use your power to make other changes, right? That allows you to not only move forward yourself, but it allows you to help other people move forward, right? And then you get to become a change agent. You get to become the person that can be an example for other people of how to get through the change, right? Get through what's happening. And that's one of your roles as a leader, right? Or a part of your role as a leader is to lead by example, is to show others. And if you are resistant to change, then you are sending a message to your team members that it's okay for them to do that as well. And while there is a time for resistance, and maybe not so much resistance, but questioning, making sure you have all the information, that the change has been thought out to the degree that it can be, there is going to come a time where you're going to have to accept that the change has happened with or without your approval, right? And acceptance isn't approval. I think that's a point that needs to be made. Acceptance is not approval, but it is the new state, and continuing to resist against what is creates suffering for you.
Yeah, that's such a great point. You can accept something and still not like it.
Yeah.
So we're not saying that you have to be like, oh, I accept it and therefore I like it. You can downright hate it, but you can still accept it. So there's that dichotomy that people sometimes forget. And from a coaching standpoint, when I teach people communication skills, or when I'm not really coaching, but when I'm training people on communication skills, and I train them on some of the coaching things that we learned, particularly validating someone's emotions, I say, you don't have to agree with someone's emotions to let them know that their emotions are okay, because their emotions belong to them. Those are their emotions. They're not yours. And whether or not you agree that they should feel that way, that's how they feel. And once people understand that, it's a lot easier for them to start using those tools. Like, you're not, because they think that when I first introduced, well, you're asking me to agree. I'm not telling you, I'm just telling you to normalize what they're going through. That's it. Because that's normal for them. That's how they process whatever it is that's going on. You process it differently. You don't have to agree. And the same thing applies to change, right? Some people like change. Some people tolerate it. Some people hate it. Some people avoid it, no matter what. And if we just look at our families as an example, we have all of those people in our family. And I will hazard, and this is a stereotype, it's not necessarily true, that the older people in your family are the people that don't like change. The younger ones are probably a little bit more flexible. Not all the time, but that's a generalization there.
No, I think that's a good generalization. And to the degree that we start to be resistant to change and being flexible, it comes because I would dare say that the older people, and this is the same in your organizations, right? The people who have been there longer, right? They may not necessarily be older, but they've been there longer. They have seen things come and go. They've seen promises made and not kept, right? And they have lost trust. Those are the people that are probably end up being more dug in to the way things were or have been, right? When younger, newer people come along and say, why are we doing it? And the answer you get is because that's the way we've always done. It was the way we did it when I came here. It's the way, this is how I like it, etc. It reminds me, I've got a couple of clients who are studying for the bar here in California. And I sat on the committee of bar examiners years ago. And the committee of bar examiners oversees the admittance of lawyers in the state of California and administers the bar exam. And when I sat for the bar exam, right here I am in the olden days, right? When I sat for the bar exam, it was a 3-day exam. And they have since moved to a 2-day exam.
How dare they?
I don't like that. And so, quite frankly, when I was on the committee, it was a proposal that was coming up before the committee. There were people saying that, this, that, and the other thing, and we should move to a due day bar. And all the lawyers on the committee were like, we had to sit for 3 days. They could sit for 3 days. So it is people who have sort of that experience in the way things are. They're sort of vested in the way things are because they've gone through it or they created it, what have you. And so whether it's in your family and older or in your organization and more tenured, it's the same sort of concept, right? And newer people are less vested in the way things are or the way things were. And that's why it's easier for them to be able to let go. And so one of the things that it's important for us to do as leaders, and why we talk about growth so much, right? Having a growth mindset instead of a fixed mindset, being open to learning, right? To be constantly in a learning mode. Why this is so important is so that you don't get dug in and become recalcitrant about things and change, because it's always happening, right? It's always happening.
And many times we've beat this horse to death. Many times you cannot affect it or influence it at all. And so it's developing that. I was saying this earlier. It's like developing a muscle when it comes to change. And the thing to really think about in your personal life and in business is that now things are changing all the time and fast. So it's tricky, because as I get older, I find myself trying to latch on to stability. And because we like stability. We talked about this in the last episode. We're human. We love stability. Stability means survival. But as an OD practitioner and coach, I have the skills that allow me to flex.
Yeah.
It's being aware. And like you said before, it's about self-awareness, being aware that, oh, wow, I'm being stuck. I'm stuck. I'm stuck in my ways. I don't want to change. And I need to start activating some of those skills. And the other part of that is to realize that if you're that leader and you are exhibiting those types of characteristics, people are going to resist you when you introduce the change. We said this before, the speed of the leader is the speed of the gang, as Mary Kay would say. You have to show your folks that you're okay with change, and then you need to be ready to deal with their resistance so they can get to acceptance a lot faster. It's
Go ahead.
It's like with anything else. If we do this drill all the time. If I put my hand up and I push on you, you're going to push back. It's part of our nature to resist pressure. So you have to, in order to get to the other side, you got to let people feel what they're feeling so they could work through it. So you can start making some plans to make progress through the change.
That helps actually make the segue into the opportunity, right? Seeing change it really is an opportunity. An opportunity for what? Opportunity for all kinds of things, creativity and innovation, right? And looking for what's possible, right? What the potentialities are. So instead of wanting to go back to the old way, and I'll use coronavirus, right? In the pandemic, 4.5 years ago, right? We went through this global change. This external force came in and, for a lot of people, upset the apple cart. And people were like, when are we going back to the way things were? We're never going back to the way things were, right? And so one of the things that helped me very early on, again, mindset, right? And I operate with a mindset of it is what it is. And so to really stop fighting against what is happening in the moment, regardless of what the change is. And I won't go into sort of why and how I really came to that, but it was a situation that I could not control. I did not want, I do not, to this day, I still do not like, but it is my life. And therefore, I can't get back what was, right? So the mindset simply is, it is what it is. And so sort of overlaying that on coronavirus, and particularly those early days, the early months, shelter in place, little bit of a rebel. I'm like, no, I went out every day. I've been out every day.
Denial.
You could call it denial, but I was accepting what is, right? Maybe not around the coronavirus, but this is what I can control.
Right.
And moving forward with what I can control. And so I wanted to move my body. I wanted to get sunshine, right? There are things that I felt were important. One, thinking it was only going to be a 2-week thing, right? And when it turned out to be much longer than 2 weeks, it was like, okay, so I really made the right decision to get out and walk every day and be in the sunshine and to continue to have conversations with friends. I did go and visit somebody, right? I went looking, and we were formulating stories of what we're going to tell the police if we got pulled over, right, for being on the road. But my mom lives alone, or at the time she lived alone, and so it's like, we're going to check on my mom. It's like that's the story. But it was, what can I do? What can I control in my life that will help me to accept the situation that we're in? And so, being resilient in that respect, right? Being someone who can bounce back when things are not quite going the way that you want, it is another huge part of moving through this process. And you have to be that for your team members, right? You have to be the example. You have to be resilient, help them be resilient. Self-awareness, your awareness of others and their emotions, right? This is where emotional intelligence plays a huge part of this, in your awareness of others, their emotions, and helping them to manage those emotions. That's part of your role as a leader. And so helping and equipping your team members to be able to do that, to adapt, to be more resilient, bouncing back, etc., is a huge part of all of this. And how do you go about doing that? Right? Give them time and space. Right? As Robert mentioned earlier, allow them to feel what they're feeling. They get to feel it. You can validate it. They don't have to wallow in it.
Yeah. And it's so funny you bring up the pandemic, and that is an excellent example of change and the stages of grief and transition and everything, because it was all there. There are some people that still are still in denial.
Yes.
Right? It didn't happen. It was a conspiracy. All these things.
And you know what? It could have been a conspiracy. That didn't mean that it didn't happen.
Right, exactly. It happened, and that's the thing. And you can't. So it's just a really good example, because we saw all that stuff, and we saw people that denied it to the point where they put themselves at risk.
Yeah.
And then we saw people that finally accepted it, and they had to, do what they needed to do to keep them safe, them and their family safe. Before that, they had some depression. I knew a lot of people that were, you're stuck in your home. You couldn't go out, you couldn't go to parties, you couldn't,
unless you were me, but
well, unless you were Whitney.
The rest of you, yes.
There was a lot of anger. So it was just, that's a really good example, a great example of a change, an external event.
And it was the global on the individual, but it impacted corporations a lot, and leadership, and how we show up or don't show up physically, emotionally at work, right? And the different phases that have resulted from, and we've talked about some of those, the great resignation and the quiet quitting, and return to work, and these various sub changes that were part of the bigger change, and our need to adapt to the environment, into into what is, right? Into what can we do if our employees cannot come into work, right? We could there were companies that probably did resist and fight that. But for many, they made the decision, flipped on a dime. Okay, they can work from home and we can still get work done, right? So flexibility, adaptability, the word of the year for 2020 was pivot. That's what we're talking about, right? That need to be able to do that.
Yeah. And the speed of your pivot is really up to you.
Yeah.
Some people, and you'll see some people can pivot really quickly. Some people, it takes them forever to do it. So, and there are benefits to being able to pivot. And it's funny that you mentioned the sub changes, because the change that I'm witnessing right now are many companies, at least in this country, are demanding people come back to work. And so again, we're having that same change in a change in transition in the other direction.
Yeah.
But we all know that there will be another something that will challenge the status quo. We don't know what it is. Typically, we have categories that or possibilities. We knew there was going to be a pandemic. We did. I mean, that was something that we talked about. We used that video, that Bill Gates video that he did in 2015. He said, this is the thing that's most prevalent right now. He's a smart guy, has a lot of resources. So there are categories, there are buckets of things that can happen, but we can't control what those things are going to be. Let's hope that we can pivot a lot faster. Maybe it's going to be the robot uprising. Who knows? But we have to be able to pivot. The people that pivot are going to be the ones that make the transition smoother and are able to survive a lot better than those that are waiting in denial and saying that it's not happening.
And that's always the way it's been. Right. That is the nature of evolution. And it's our ability to adapt to the new circumstances. Again, you don't have to like it. You don't have to be a part of it, but you do have to ultimately accept what is, so that you can do what you need to do to adapt and live in the new state. And, we don't do a lot of politics here, but the recent election is another example, right? We've had a change, or are going to have a change in administration and party. And there are a lot of people who have run the gamut of emotions, of grief, right? The stages of grief, and some have accepted and said, okay, this is the new administration that's coming in. I don't like it. What am I going to do in order to navigate the new reality, right? And others are going to continue to be resistant and are mounting a resistance of sorts. So you can do that. They still, even in continuing the resistance, they had to accept that this is going to be the new state in order to mount that resistance. So it's up to you. The bottom line is, it's up to you.
And it's in line with what we were talking about. If you accept, then you can plan. But,
Yes.
but if you're in denial, you're kind of frozen. You're in that space where you're really not doing anything, or you're vacillating between, I could do this, or I should do this, or this should have happened, like you said, and you're not getting anything done because you're paralyzed. So this is a fascinating topic, and we could probably, Whitnie and I could probably talk about this for 6 episodes, but
but we're not. We're
no.
going to wrap this up. So any final thoughts?
No, I just think that this was a great and timely topic to bring up. This was your topic. Thank you for bringing this topic up. It's making me think about a lot of stuff. Some of that stuff that we'll talk about after the episode. But it's made me think about a lot about things and how I navigate change and transition, and the situations where I'm not aware, and and when I should be more aware of what I'm thinking and feeling.
Yeah, absolutely. So I guess my final thoughts are that, and you just said this, right? You can't adapt to change that you don't accept. You don't have to like it. You don't have to agree with it, but you do have to accept that the state is the state. And then if you want to make changes to it, you want to put a plan in place to either live and move within it, or to try to change it again, right? You can do that. That's a choice that you have. That's where your power lies as both a leader and someone who reports to leaders, right? You have that ability. As a leader, it is your responsibility to manage your own change, and then to help those that you lead to navigate and manage theirs. And so when we embrace change, we can lead ourselves and others. Again, it's about opportunities. It's about possibilities and potentialities. And you can't get there if you don't accept what is. So with that, I want to thank you for making a change from whatever you were doing till you came here to join us, to be a part of this conversation. If you enjoyed the conversation, we invite you to, leave a comment and let us know what you're thinking. If you think we're off base, say that too, right? I'm open. I think Robert's open to
Mostly
hearing different perspectives and points of view, and so feel free if you've got a different one to share it.
Yeah.
And join us next time, right? We're here Thursdays, 3 p.m. Eastern, 12 noon Pacific. The State of Leadership, Simple and Beyond, talking all things leadership. If there's a topic that you would like for us to cover, drop us a note and let us know. And Robert, if someone wanted to drop a note and let you know what they want us to talk about, or they want to explore working with you, how would they go about doing that?
They can reach out to me at inspireme@roberthilliardcoaching.com. That's my email. Or they can go to Robert Hilliard Coaching and just go to that contact form, fill that out, let me know your goals, your challenges, and we'll set up a meeting, have that discovery call, and see if we're a good match for each other.
Awesome. And if you want to reach out to me, feel free. shiftingintoaction.now.site. And I look forward to discussing with you how I might be of service to you. So again, with that, we want to thank you on YouTube. Like, subscribe, leave a comment on the other platforms, Facebook, LinkedIn, leave a comment, reach out. And until next time, take care.